Hello, everyone, and welcome to Make Romance Great podcast. Still not again. My name's Paulina, and I'm joined here, as always, by my great friend.
Monica, and today we'll talk about how we speak and how we used to speak about romance now and then,
Yes,
whatever
we're
then
using
means.
we're using then very liberally, mostly in the sort of shorthand for old school romance and new school romance, I guess. But then, as you'll find out, can stretch as far back as 1800s.
Yeah, pretty much. So if we venture that far away, maybe the important thing we should begin with is defining what romance is to start with, right? So
Absolutely.
pretty much if we go to Wikipedia, we will have romance and we will have romance novel. In Polish, it's not that much of a difference because romance and romance novel, it will still be called as romance. But there is definitely difference between one and the other. Do you want to take that?
Sure. When I was trying to find what are the legit definitions that we have of romance novel, the first and most obvious one that most people reference is the one dictated by the Romance writers of America, which is a central love story and an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. That's how romance has been defined based on what it used to be and kind of as it continues.
Plus one, I will agree. Oh, come on, there is a love story and it ends with a happy ending. Or
No,
happy
absolutely.
or happily for now at least.
I
Um,
think the reason why they say emotionally satisfying and optimistic is to encompass as much as possible. And interestingly, the Romantic Novelist Association, which is the UK version, they kind of say the same thing, but in far more words. They say that an exploration of romantic love must be an important element of the plot or a major subplot of the story, and the ending of a romantic novel will commonly be uplifting. They go into more details on what is and what isn't acceptable as far as they go, but the basic premise is still there. There's people who are in love, and the ending will usually be uplifting, emotionally satisfying. But I think the more we start looking into it, the some of the newer researchers, they've had some interesting takes. So like Pamela Regis or Regis, I'm not actually sure. I'm gonna keep saying Regis because that makes sense to me. She expanded on that by saying that a romance is a work of prose fiction that tells the story of the courtship and betrothal of one or more protagonists. So that's already a lot more inclusive.
it is, and looking at the fact that it comes from her Natural History of Romance novel, which was published in 2003. This is quite long time ago. It's almost 20
That's
years.
22 years. Yeah, 22 years
22.
ago.
Oh God, my math doesn't exist. Math isn't mathing. We may also add what Maya Rodale said in her Dangerous Books for Girls from 2015. I think it was 2015 when it was initially published. So these are stories in which two individuals come to a greater understanding of themselves through a romantic relationship. It is virtually guaranteed that no children, dogs, heroes, or heroines will die, which is very
Yes.
important, I would say. But whatever Maya Rodale or Pamela Regis said, this will still be just a little bit broadening the initial definition.
Mm,
It is just exploration of a romantic relationship between two people, or well, now more,
yes, absolutely.
as we became, as you already said, much more inclusive. It will give us the emotionally satisfying ending.
And when we think of not just how a romance is defined, but what we consider a romance novel, most of what we talk about is basically just the 20th century. You have a couple of outliers. People always say Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, like Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. They are the outliers. Most of what we consider romance is pretty much 20th century.
Yes, but we will say that they are predecessors, let's say, of
Absolutely.
the romance novels. But in the time, they weren't called romance novels. They were
Mm.
novels. That's it. And talking about romance, we can't talk about romance altogether without talking about novels and the opinion that novels had when they started appearing in, I don't know where is the first novels, somewhere between 18th and 19th century, I would say.
It depends who you ask because that's just for Western.
Academics.
No, 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 but I mean that's just for Western literature. The first novel, for example, in Japanese literature, is considered The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu, and that's going like, oh my God, 700 something AD. So as far as Western literature goes, yeah. Because even when you think about it, and I know I use the comparison to crime a lot, but it's a genre that's just as clearly defined and identifiable as romance. But when Sherlock Holmes came out, it wasn't necessarily thought of as this is a crime novel. No, it was a novel, or more accurately, a set of short stories. Similarly with Jane Austen and with Charlotte Bronte, they were novels first, and the genres came later because, let's face it, people liked it and people started copying the formula. And I think a lot of when we talk about romance novel as a genre, a lot of the discourse that we'll get into basically starts with when romance started being mass produced. Whether you consider that to be Harlequin and their publications, whether you look at short stories in magazines in like the 1920s, that is roughly when the broader discourse of romance novels and specifically looking down on it because it was written by women and for women, that's kind of where it all began.
So as you said, we start talking about genres somewhere in 20th century, and commonly considered that the first romance novel, so not romance, just a romance novel, we know would be 1972, and it starts with the book published by Kathleen E. Woodwise called The Flame and the Flower, which I never read and I really want to now,
No.
since we would consider it as a first romance novel called a romance novel.
Yes, yes. I mean, I've only became aware of it ever since starting reading more academic discourse about romance as a genre because it keeps being referenced. That and Samuel Richardson's Pamela, even though because that was 1740, so even way before Jane Austen, that was just a novel, even though it laid out a lot of the tropes and common themes that we now associate with romance. But yeah, I would like to read both of them just to get a feel. And if slash when we do, we're going to share our thoughts about that on another episode sometime in the future. But now that we're on the same page of we know what romance is, we have an idea of when it all began. But was it always looked down on?
Yes,
Did people
we can end the
don't get
episode.
to the conclusion before we've laid out our argument?
The
Yeah,
spoiler alert, yes.
I got into that question and started thinking specifically about Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen because that is one of the most common examples. And I tried to find some bits of what people at the time when her novels were being published, what they thought of that. Whether there was any of that, oh no, a woman writing a novel. How that has to be stupid, it has to be horrible.
Oh no, a woman reading a novel. She must be very shallow and stupid, and oh God, no.
How dare she? How dare she get out of line?
We don't actually have to look very far if it comes to how women reading novels were perceived by the society. We can just read Northanger Abbey, in which a big part of the novel is just talking about novels and about reading novels. And of course, we all know that Jane Austen had a good laugh at Gothic novels in Northanger Abbey, but she never denied that what she is actually writing it's a novel, maybe not a gothic novel that she made fun of, especially of Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, but Northanger Abbey was a novel, and there were situations in Northanger Abbey, the scenes where some of the characters were saying, "Oh, it's just a novel." It's exactly how a lot of people now would say about romance. What are you reading? It's just a romance. So we
Mm,
have it's just a novel, it's just a romance. The parallel is very clear here.
that's true. I guess like what I was more interested in is when you get people nowadays reviewing romance novels, you either get the fans who are tend to be more, speak about it more positively, or you get the literary critics who just slag it off. And I was trying to find effectively reviews of Jane Austen at the time, which it was hard because that wasn't yet the culture. Literary reviews weren't much of a thing. So the only bits that we know of contemporary opinions came from some letters. The most commonly quoted one was Lady Bessborough in letter to the Duchess of Devonshire called Pride and Prejudice, a clever novel, though it ends stupidly, which I find absolutely hilarious. And that's quoted in Southam's book about Jane Austen. But even he admits, like most that survived, that was discovered through letters, it was either quite neutral opinions or actually quite positive. There was none of that because it's written by a woman. It has to be nothing more than silly nonsense. Some people called it nonsense, but for the most part, it was just, it's a novel. Well done. Moving on.
Yeah, so Lady Bessborough was at least not being salty. She just expressed her opinions, which
Yeah.
is very interesting that we will still have, like in this very short message that you just read, we will have expressed her disapproval on the class inequality between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, even though in theory they were the same class, just the money. But there were some people that were much more salty altogether about women's literature and not only novels, but altogether stuff being written by women
You
that
mean
were getting,
people or men?
yeah, man, okay. Let's
Let's let's call a
let's
spade
stop
a spade.
let's stop referring to men by saying people. Yeah, man. In 1855, Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is famously known as the author of A Scarlet Letter, wrote to his friends, well, in a letter as well. America is now wholly given over to a damned mob of scribbling women, and I should have no chance of success while the public taste is occupied with their trash, and should be ashamed of myself if I did succeed. What is the mystery of these innumerable editions of The Lamplighter and other books neither better nor worse? Worse they could not be, and better they need not be when they sell by the 100,000. Well, super sour for not being as popular as you thought you deserve, aren't you, mate, huh?
Yeah, tell me you're jealous without telling me you're jealous.
Well, absolutely. I write something explicit. I write something amazing, and yet the mob of scribbling women is much more popular than I am. But I will say that no, I don't want to be as popular as them.
Yes, I think in some of the bits I've read, a lot of that sour and salty feelings, they come from the dividing of literature into high art and lowbrow or mass art or things like this. And men writers like Nathaniel Hawthorne, may he rot in hell, will very quickly go and count their own works as this is high art. This is art with capital A. But this stuff that women write, this is just, stuff that sells by hundreds of thousands. There's nothing worthwhile in this. This is trash, and they should be ashamed of themselves for writing it and reading it.
And this stuff is not even written by particular female authors. It is written by a mob
Yes,
of
it's a
scribbling
mob.
women.
It's a mob of scribbling women. I think, was it him? Oh no, there was someone else. There was Greg William Rathbone in The False Morality of Lady Novelists. Like, by the way, what a title to already announce that you're salty. But in The False Morality of Lady Novelists from 1859, he wrote, thousands of women have nothing to do and yet are under the necessity of doing something. It's like, mate, you are a writer. Do you think, like, are you so fucking busy that, you know, don't you have other shit to be doing except be writing this salty stuff? Like,
Yeah,
get a bit of perspective.
he kind of really lost it.
You really did. It was, yeah, it was a very short bit of, nah, mate, get over yourself.
So, poor opinion of romance pretty much moved from poor opinion about novels altogether. Yeah, we already stated that. And I would add here about novels written by women.
Yes, because it was women who were writing novels. Men were made for poetry and philosophy and
Absolutely.
all the greater pursuits. Even though I am pretty sure a whole bunch of blokes were very happily reading Sherlock Holmes, which is neither philosophy nor poetry. Admittedly, it's a bit later than 1850s, but
Yes.
still. And not a lot has changed. Like we're reading these quotes from 1850s and given takes from 1850s, but anecdotally, like, people will say, "Oh, so you just read smut," or "So you just write smut," and devalue the romance novel purely because of the fact that A, it's a novel, it's a romance, and because it's foreign by women.
I would also add here that, yeah, we already said that men are destined to write something more, so poetry and or philosophy or philosophical novels, because philosophical novel is not a novel, obviously. But yeah, the novels were a domain of women. And it's quite important to remember that these women, because probably they had no other choice, they were trying to appear, even in their novels, as being aware of of what they are doing, of what they are writing. As I already mentioned, Jane Austen in Northanger Abbey, she had a huge laugh at Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. And I would say she went a little bit into not like other girls vibe. So these other women, they are writing very stupid Gothic novels, which are absurd, but my novels is very sarcastic and it's not. It's it's not like the other girls' novel. Or in Pride and Prejudice, there are scenes where Mr. Collins is in Longbourn and absolutely refuses to read to the girls, to everyone, any novel, and she goes into sermons, I think. So it also gives us the vibe of the era, right? So the books
Mm,
themselves, they will tell us that novels are not considered anything good, anything respectable. Even later novel authors like Lucy Maud Montgomery in her Anne of Green Gables, there are loads of proper matrons that we will meet on the
mm,
pages of the novels that will comment something about novels, that novels are not appropriate, their novels
mm,
are dangerous. So at one hand, it is kind of like novelists letting their readers know that, yeah, I know this is not considered anything proper or respectable, but I will still do it. Or they will do it like, yes, but the other novels are bad, but mine is fantastic. Mine is something else.
I quite like the idea of writers at the time doing this big nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's like writing novels is not appropriate and reading them is not very proper, but you're doing it. Come to the dark side with me, girly.
Yes, and I wrote it.
Oh my gosh, the scandal.
Scandalous.
But yeah, like that kind of idea and like that mysticism around romance novel, it went from being about novels because it was mostly women writing them and mostly women reading them to being about romance novels now. Like when we were thinking about this, I went on a bit of a mission because you get all these lists of like top 100 books to read before you die. Like BBC has famously won, there's been all kinds of others, but pick whatever list you like. you'll very rarely find stuff in there that's romance. Like there's books by women, but there's rarely stuff like romance. You've got Gone with the Wind, Pride and Prejudice. That's probably about it.
Yes, but like as we already said, they are more considered classics, not really a romance classic or romantic
That it's true.
literature classics.
But that being said, because at first I thought, is it that these lists are just very outdated, that no one's updated them since? But if you include children's literature, then you have books from the 1990s, like Jacqueline Wilson is there for us. There's books from the 1980s. So surely amidst the entire genre of romance, there is something that would make its way there to be something a bit more contemporary than Gone with the Wind. But yet, no, the snobbery continues.
I would just say that this snobbery continues if it comes to fantasy as well.
A
In all of
little
this
bit.
list, what can you find there? Lord of the
Lord of the
Rings?
Rings, Harry Potter.
Possibly sometimes, but we don't give a fuck about Harry
No,
Potter anymore.
no, we don't. But there are sci-fi and fantasy is probably better represented on those lists than romance.
Yeah, fine. But like it would be seen better if you say you read a fantasy. It's better to read books for children with dragons and fairies rather than people fucking. Guess what? Dragons and fairies can fuck too.
Spoilers. But also, is it because boys have decided that they like books about dragons and fairies and spaceships, and therefore this is now okay to be literature when they've not decided, oh, maybe one day I will love someone, so maybe I can read books about people who love each other. Yeah, and also anecdotally, at the time that we're recording this, it's not been long since Onyx Storm has released. And out of, again, pure vindictive curiosity, I went on news outlets such as The Guardian, which The Guardian's quite respected for its various cultural coverage of things and its impact. And yes, obviously, The Guardian has published a release about Onyx Storm report or even a list of best romance books of 2024, but they're not on the front page. The Guardian Books website, the front page is concerned with more mainstream bits, ignoring the massive financial success of stuff like Onyx Storm.
And I would say these books, either romantasy or just contemporary romance novels, they started to make their way into all of these reviews more or less when 50 Shades of Grey was published first. And it's not because this book is such an amazing book, because spoiler alert, it's not. But it was such a mass success that it couldn't be ignored. They just couldn't say this part of the genres doesn't exist.
Mm, I'm just sorry, I was just scrolling through to find the article, but people used to think that the success of 50 Shades of Grey was a bit of an anomaly, that was just about this book. It sold tons, it brought lots of revenue to the genre, and things fell, in terms of sales, things went down until basically TikTok.
No.
But looking at the actual numbers, the bookseller has published some reports on the total consumer market for various genres. And yes, romance and sagas, as they categorize it, is at a record high in 2024 at like 69 million, first of all. 69.
Lol.
But also 69 million is is not a small sum. This is the fourth largest category, and the largest category being general and literary fiction, and a lot of women's literature, chick lit, romance is still being published or marketed by publishers as general and literary fiction because they think that will give them more of an appeal. So in actual fact, since 50 Shades of Grey, everything that's been published and everything that's gained traction and been successful probably has been labeled as something else and contributed to that genre's financial success, and in turn diminishing the the reported financial revenue of romance and sagas. Because who cares about romance? Well, apparently people who spend £69 million do.
I also think that quite important is to mention the research on romance then versus now. And also, well, on under the umbrella of research, we can also put the critics altogether.
Mm,
And also, it's quite interesting to see how the romance writers themselves were seeing themselves
hmm
some time ago. So let's say in the 70s, 80s, 90s, where we have the era of the so-called classical romance,
mm.
and how they see themselves and their readers now.
That is I think that might be even an even bigger change compared to the research, because there's only so you can change and do research better, which that's what's happening. But it's the perception of how writers see themselves and how they see their readers. I think that's the biggest change between the old school romance and the new school romance and now.
Yes, so well, talking about that, I think very important thing to mention is that romance writers in the 90s, and I am basing my opinion mostly on the book of essays edited by Jane Ann Krantz, which is called Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, Romance Writers on the Appeal of the Romance. They were well, there are lots of different authors and lots of different essays on different topics, starting on how romance is perceived, on the writing romance, on the hero, the heroine, etc., the plot. Um, but the thing that really hit me when reading this book is how defensive lots of writers are.
Mm. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, they are. So I suppose it's very much comes from the critics that was, I think, much more harsh, and it was harder for the romance readers to see how popular their favorite genre is, or maybe not the favorite genre, but the one that they are just reading. They just read.
Mm.
Um, but the writers were at one side very proud of what they write, and it apparently gives them loads of joy, but they are also so very defensive. And what is coming from that defensiveness are things that I would like very strongly disagree with. So
hmm
starting from the things like we shouldn't criticize romance as much because it's a multi-million worth market, and I'm like, yeah, so what? It
I
doesn't
mean,
matter.
video games are a multi-million dollar, pound, whatever market. We still criticize them.
Oh, absolutely, right? So it doesn't matter that much how much it is worth. Um, I also disagree with the take on the romance that we shouldn't talk how much is it worth because it doesn't matter. Well, we can enjoy it and still talk about how much it is worth. One is not the result of the other, right? We do not
hmm
like romance because it's much worth this and that. We just do. But yeah, altogether, people are very defensive, talking about how much is it worth and how much money it makes to the publishers, how much romance is different than any other genre, well, going into things that are completely absurd. Let me
Not
just.
like other girls.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There is like very interesting take on that by my favorites, kinda. Linda
Favorite.
Barlow and Jane Ann Krantz on their essay Beneath the Surface, saying, well, they are very much making a difference between women's and men's writing. I think this is the just the 90s thing.
It really was.
Yeah, so just kind of saying that, well, let me just read some part of it. Is it possible that accepted literary standards of excellence are essentially patriarchal in nature? We propose this as a matter for further debate and discussion. And are there any differences between what men and women generally regard as acceptable prose style? Who made the rules that all serious writers are supposed to have internalized? Get rid of every adjective and adverb. A male colleague advised me after reading a draft of my latest manuscript. He also advised the use of shorter sentences, lean and spare, short and terse, no emotion. But why, for example, must we show and not tell? Women enjoy the telling. We value the exploration of emotional in verbal terms. We are not as interested in action as we are in depth of emotion. And we like the emotion to be clear and authoritative, not vague or overly subtle, the way it often seems to be in male discourse. Excuse me, what a bullshit.
Stuff like this to me reads like, okay, Linda, if you think
Calm
that
down.
it, first of all, but if you think that you can just tell and not show, why not shorten your entire novel, presumably about 300 pages, to he met her, she loved him first, he then fell in love with her. They loved each other very much. It all ended well. That's not good writing.
And it doesn't give us anything from the definition of the romance. There is no adventure in the relationship between male and female, or male, female and female, etc., etc. Let's just don't get into
No.
too much
Whilst
details. And it doesn't give us happy ending. This is just a description, Linda.
mm,
And the other thing, show not tell, it's not a male prose. This is just a good writing. Just tell us what happened with her. And no, she was very happy. Yes, I will definitely believe that.
whilst I've not read The Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women myself, I'm gonna read some of those essays. I've read bits of Tanya Modleski's Loving with a Vengeance, which is another quite iconic and like often quoted piece of research on romance as a genre that was published in 1982.
That's one of the mentioned by the some authors of Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, one of two hate reads, or like hate critiques, hate rights, however we will say it. This is Tanya
It, it,
Modleski's.
is that
Uh,
how they described her?
oh
As a hate
yes,
read?
this is.
Interesting.
I mean, this is not what they say exactly, but this is how
Mhm.
Maya Rodale will write about the other book. I will just find the name.
I find that very interesting because whilst I don't agree with everything that Tanya Modleski wrote about romance, it didn't read to me as coming from the position of trying to hate on the genre. It's clear that she's not necessarily like the biggest reader of romance and she's trying to stay as objective as possible, which for a researcher, I respect. That's what we want. What did strike me, and I think the Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women is the same, is those research about romance genre from the 70s and 80s and 90s, they sound like they're trying to defend the genre, but at the same time, they just accept that the only way we can discuss literature is in comparison of male versus female or highbrow versus lowbrow. There's just no questioning that romance can exist and you can just study stuff within romance itself. It always has to be in comparison to the rest of the world. And I think
So,
that's where that defensiveness comes from.
so Maya Rode was mentioning the reading the romance Women, Patriarchy and Popular Literature by Janice A. Rodway. So this is
Yeah.
what she described as a very famous hate read, hate write, let's say,
Mm,
on the romance. I haven't read this one yet,
no, not
but
yet.
this I have to read it, or at
Hmm.
least like have a look at it, because it appeared in Dangerous Men, Adventurous Women a couple of times, and this must be very critical because it made the authors Well, it must have been a very painful read for them.
It ruffled
Um,
some feathers.
Absolutely. And they also were very defensive, saying that, well, the critics and the feminists hate romance. So it was a very, it had to be very painful if it comes to literary critique and if it comes to feminism, because currently, I think this is very interesting take as well, because currently we will rather look at the romance as a, well, kind of feminist literature.
This, but also we tend to just look at romance, not romance in comparison to other genres, to
Yep,
rest of literature. It's
yes,
what happens in this little sandbox.
yes.
I really liked Pamela Regis, her What Do Critics Owe the Romance, that keynote address, because she basically said, well, first of all, pick good books. I get that in like 70s and 80s, like those books, they were of the quality that they were. We've obviously gotten better, but we can't do research about romance now whilst still using Kathleen Woodiwiss from 1970s. We have to study what's been written now because a lot has changed and pick good books. Like you, again, you wouldn't study classics of literature and pick some writing by some fumbling fool who lived, I don't know, in a tiny village just outside shithole. You pick you pick the stuff that actually had an impact culturally, societally, whatever. You pick stuff that is of good quality to study rather than
So this is also what happened in some articles from the Journal of Popular Romance Studies. I will not say exactly which one because I was just having a look at few of them. But what struck me at some point was that one of the authors was talking about urban fantasy romance in like very critique way. So she was just saying, yeah, this is not feminist, this is pretty much bad. And when I had a look at the books that she was mentioning, like she chose 5 books, 5 romance
Mhm.
novels, and it was something about paranormal romance, by the way.
Okay.
Anyways, so she chose 5 books, from which 4 of them had like less than 100 readers on Goodreads. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh no, oh no. Does academia choose books to prove something never happened ever?
And also, and that's again, that's a point that Pamela Regis makes, like not just choose good books, but recognize that something can be a good book and potentially not be very popular. There's also stuff that objectively isn't a very good book, but that sells pretty well. And the values of the readers don't always correlate to the values of the whole community. I mean, the fact that within romance itself right now, people go, is monster romance acceptable or is that just erotica? There's some people who are arguing that, but those are their own separate little discussions within the genre rather than trying to say, all romance is bad. Look at this pure sex on pages with monsters. Like you've deliberately chosen books that support your argument there, mate.
Well, even if, who cares?
There is very much that. And I think some of the other bits that we're starting to see in research right now, whereas previously with that defensive attitude, there was a lot of trying to justify, like, yes, romance isn't trying to be high art. Researchers have more of that similar attitude as readers, just to say it's escapist and a source of joy, and we just enjoy it. So why not find out why we enjoy it or what about it we enjoy? We can still question the things that we enjoy without taking anything away. Groundbreaking idea, I know.
But it is kind of groundbreaking, but not only for the readers, but for the critiques as well. I just today I've seen, I know we are mentioning this book second time in this episode, but we are not sponsored, I promise. So we are recording this around the time of releasing of The Onyx Storm, so the third book of the Fourth Wing series. Um, And well, the things are happening. There are loads of reviews of people loving it and people hating it, obviously. Um, but I've seen an amazing reel on Instagram. We will link it
Mm-hmm.
in the description because I can't really remember who posted. Anyways, so it was pretty much saying like, yeah, the person who recorded that, they said that, yeah, I've seen loads of reviews, 5, 7, 10, half an hour long. And what's was really interesting to them is like, well, yes, that as much as loads of readers, they know what they are reading. I
Mm-hmm.
I'm finishing the Iron Flame now, and I see this book. I mean
Mm-hmm.
the Avatar, right? I see you. So I know what is fair. I know what is wrong with this book. I see all of the issues, but like this is fun. This is escapist.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me loads and loads of joy. It gives me.
Mm.
But a lot of critiques are missing this. So they are applying
Mm.
very serious factors of the critical reading of the book to the book that is not trying to be anything. Like, you are missing the marks, guys. You
Mm.
are trying to be very serious and be very pompous and be very snobby to the book that is not trying to be snobby, that is not pretending to be Tolkien. It is not. It is very stupid. This is like, you are just, I don't know, like what
I'll
this.
I'll tell you I'll tell you what it's like. It's like trying to say that there's not enough serious discussions about mental health in Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah,
Like, yes,
kind of.
we all know that the different characters in Winnie the Pooh are kind of representing, various neurological or psychological disorders, but it's meant for kids. It's just to give them a flavor. That's not the appropriate time to discuss depression or ADHD.
Yes, so like these books are kind of called, I don't know, Court of Dragon and Dick Riding, and you are still trying to see, it's like, yeah, but where is the world building? It is not. And it is not trying to give you that. It is not promising you that it will give you that. Okay, with the first book, some people might have been a bit angry because
Mm.
it was marketed as a fantasy, not
Yeah, the marketing
romantasy.
was a bit misleading.
Yeah, but like now with the third book, are you joking? You are making this reviews just to get a views for the hatred. If you want to do this, fine, but like just do not apply very serious literary factors to the book that is pure fun because it's
Yeah,
idiotic and it doesn't make Fourth Wings readers look stupid. It doesn't make the author look stupid. The only stupid person is now you, or at least you are making yourself look like, because you are completely missing the point.
yeah. And it links us nicely to the point that you've already made, in that nowadays, when we talk about like how romance writers view their job being romance writers and readers as well frequently, is we do have more of a connection with other people like us. Right now, if you're a romance author or even a romance reader, whether you're an old millennial and still use forums, or whether you're on top of things and use something current and fast-paced like TikTok, where often you can also get in directly in discussion with the author themselves. Being a romance reader is far more visible. It's no longer book clubs in someone's living room or going to an event somewhere far away that only a few people in a big city can access. Like, yes, the algorithm still keeps you in the little silo of your own interest, but as a genre, we have so much more reach to connect with each other than, even Harlequin or Mills and Boon were able to accomplish at the peak of their publishing, I want to say in like 70s thereabouts, and only in relative secrecy and shame. The authors of the romance, as well as of those research like Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women and all this, they could only really talk about this stuff. They could only get their moments of, oh my gosh, I really love this, with through letters with their friends, maybe a phone call later on, and very rarely if they were lucky enough to have a book club around. Now we're not restricted like this. We can just go and find people like us and connect this way and connect instantly. And because romance has also grown as a genre, that means that it's more reflective of the stuff that people experience. I did find one quite interesting study that was comparing, it basically recreated a study from, I want to say, 70s or 80s, where at that time, the researcher interviewed a bunch of women anonymously who were reading romance in some library about what they thought of the books, how they felt, da da da, and did a similar thing now. And the demographic difference is amazing because it went from mostly married, mostly middle age, like maybe mid 20s at the absolute youngest, and mostly staying at home kind of women who are reading romance, to a broader range of ages of people who are more likely to be single than before, a smaller percentage of married women, and almost all of them, or a significant portion of them, working full time, who are still reading romance. They're still enjoying the love connection, but now they're like, we want more smut. We want more smut because that is fun.
It is fun. It is fun.
It is fun. And that reflects their sort of lived reality of, yeah, like people have sex, get over it.
We may talk in the future, in some Wingspan episode or however we will call it, or just sex episode, that
Mm,
how much the description of sexual intercourse changed over time. So how it looked like in, well, the mentioned 90s, early 2000s books, how the description of sex changed. And how they are looking now, which I would say there is a difference because the
oh,
scenes now
absolutely.
are like very action-like, movie-like. There is loads of description, loads of anatomy, and it's like, where is the poetry?
I noticed that myself, like once I
Yeah.
got back into reading, and especially reading romance, having grown up on those mid 2000s historical Regency
Yes.
romance where it was it was never penis, it was manhood. It was never
Yes.
vagina. It was like it was something flowery. Whereas now
Sacred vessel or something.
something like this. Whereas
Yeah.
now, like even books like whether it's Iron Flame, whether that
He put
spoiler
his thing
alert.
and put into my thing, whatever. Yeah, but
Yeah,
what I wanted to
it's
say,
yeah.
like, besides the sex scenes and the smut altogether, that is fun and readers do really want it. Um, you just mentioned who would be the people reading the romance who took part in the study, right? In the research. This is the thing that was very interesting for me in The Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, that was one of very defensive arguments that women who read the romance, they are full-time working women and they are well educated. They finish college, they finish universities, they had bachelors, they have masters, whatever, whatever, whatever. Like for me, it's still yeah, and what? But I
Yeah,
would say this is because I'm a millennial and I live in these times, not in and I was not a romance reader in the 80s, 90s, or 70s. But this is not an argument for me, and this argument is very classist.
it is very classist, especially since like that particular study that I was mentioning, it
Let's
was more
respect
making a
romance
comparison.
because
No, no, but it was
educated women read this, right? It's
but
like, yeah, so
but
what?
no, but that one wasn't specifically talking
Yeah,
about education status. It was just saying it's working full time versus working
yeah,
at home. And working full time, you can work full time at a supermarket or you can work full time as a doctor. It
of course.
doesn't matter what you do professionally, and that doesn't impact what you should or should not read and what you can or cannot enjoy. Read whatever makes you happy because ultimately reading is escapist, especially when reading fiction. Non-fiction is different,
Yeah,
but read whatever makes you happy, girl.
absolutely. What is also very cool now, probably also thanks to TikTok, Instagram, booktubes, book talks, bookstagrams, however you will call it, is that all of the terms that we used to call romance novels stop to be so diminishing. Because like you would have the oh the body stripper and the mommy porn and Fabio books. We will talk about Fabio later, possibly, because he's a real person, by the way. And now it's not. You'll see loads and loads and loads of TikTok saying, "Yeah, I'm reading smut. I'm here for smut."
It's that reclamation of the word in a
I
very
I
similar
would say
way
so.
how the queer community has reclaimed gay. Gay used to be an insult,
Yeah,
having come from a perfectly neutral word, and now gay is just the accepted standards. That's what we call homosexual men,
yeah,
and sometimes even extending that beyond just men. It's the word, and I think we're getting that now. We're in the moment of change with romance, where people go, yeah, I read smut, or if they prefer stuff that's completely sexless, then they go, yeah, I read romance. That's the point I think will come back time and again of we are losing that shame, and therefore we are losing the defensiveness, and therefore we can finally start talking about romance in a way that it deserves.
this is something that also changed in, I would say, recent years, let's say book media years, because Maya Rodale in the 2015 Dangerous Books for Girls wrote, when the New York Times does talk about romance novels, the results are widespread, long-lasting, and cringe-inducing. They're credited with popularizing the terms body stripper and mommy porn. Both phrases diminish the genre by reducing it to just the naughty bits and insult the reader by implying that they're reading smut. So my first thought was, yeah, and now this it's 10 years and it turns out that, well, the difference in Maya Rodale's Dangerous Books for Girls and Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women from 1992, it's a huge difference. But I also see quite a lot of changes from 2015 and now.
Absolutely. And
You will
again,
have
it's
people in book media just saying, I just read smut, get over it.
yeah, that's basically what it boils down to. It's like I'm not judging you for reading about blue people being killed on a planet. Why are you judging me for
Fucking
reading
blue people on the planet.
about two blue people fucking on a planet?
Well, one of them can be human.
They can be whatever,
Yeah.
as long as it's consensual.
Came here for smart state for the consent or however it was.
And that is how we used to speak about romance, how we speak about romance now, and how we're going to carry on speaking about romance in Make Romance Great podcast. So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for being here. We have all kinds of social media for you to follow in the description box wherever you're listening. We're typically as Make Romance Great underscore pod. I'm Paulina. You've been hearing from Monica as well.
And this is how we make romance great.
See you next time.